Welcome back, everybody. My name is Mr. A, and today's topic is going to be percentages. Let's talk about them.
Hey everyone, Mr. A here. I wanted to make a little insert here where the intro I was going to make would have gone, just to quickly explain something. I just got this brand new microphone and tried to record the audio from that instead of the fuzzy audio that tends to come in through the camcorder. On the bright side, for much of the video, the audio sounds really great. On the downside is that apparently the audio cut out on my microphone without me realizing it during the last couple minutes. So don't be alarmed, it's not your computer. When you hear the audio suddenly become more fuzzy and echoey, that was the point where I used my backup audio that was recorded on the camcorder. The main audio from my microphone didn't quite make it, so just letting you know, it's not your computer, it's me, my bad. I'll double check the footage and the audio next time to make sure that this mistake doesn't happen again. Alright?
Before we get too far along, let me give you a little bit of a background. Every fraction, every decimal, every percent that you have ever dealt with and ever will dealt with has a counterpart. They are all related to each other. An example I have up here on the board at the top would be 1/2. 1/2, if you were to take that fraction and turn it into decimal form, you would get 0.5 or 5/10. You could take that 5/10 and change that again to get 50%. The example I have down at the bottom is 3/4 or 3/4. You could take 3/4 and turn it into 0.75, also known as 75/100. Once you've got 75/100, you can take that and turn it into 75%. But you're not here for these little examples. You're here because you want to know how to do these transitions. First, let's try doing fractions to decimals. You got all that information down? I know it's a lot to read. Yeah, no, it's not. There's really not much you have to do in order to go from a fraction to a decimal. All you have to do is take your 3/5, 3/5, and do that problem. 3 divided by 5. Well, while that may sound simple and is only explained by one word, some of you may not be fully familiar with how to divide 3 by 5, a number that is bigger than 3. I think you all agree that if we were to start doing this problem, we would end up with 5 going into 3 0 times, and that just doesn't work. We can't stop there. Let me show you a little trick. First, a little bit of a backstory. If I were to say that I have $3, and I would also say that at the same time I have $3.00, would I be correct? I would. $3 and $3.00 is exactly the same thing. How would I write $3.00, you might ask? Well, you're probably not asking that. You're probably already halfway through filling this in. You would simply put a 0.0 next to that 3, right? We'll put our decimal and put our 0. That is exactly the same thing as saying 3. We just might not always write 3.0 or 3.00. In theory, we could add any amount of zeros to the right of that decimal, or excuse me, to the far right of that decimal, and it would not change the value of that 3. Now, if we were to start adding zeros over here on the other side of my decimal, we'd be in it would be a whole different story. So, let's take a look at what we have to do next. Now that we've added our 0 down here, where do we have to add our decimal in order to keep going? You figured it out yet? If you haven't, let me give you a little hint. It belongs right here. Was that a subtle enough hint for you? Okay, good. We're going to put our decimal there, and then we can resume doing this problem as we would any other division problem. 5 goes into 3, we've already done. 5 goes into 30. It goes in 6 times. We'll put our 6 there, do 6 times 5, and that will give us our answer of 30. We'll put that right here. Subtract it, giving us no remainder. Our final answer for this problem was 0.6 or 6/10. That is what 3/5 would look like if we were to take it and turn it into a decimal. Are you happy with this? I hope so. If not, feel free to go back and rewatch this again. But for now, let's move on to changing from a decimal into a percent. To go from a decimal to a percent, all you really have to do is multiply that decimal by 100. Or you could simply move your decimal to the right twice, 2 spaces. One way you can use to help you think about this or remember it is think about SpongeBob. More specifically, think about Patrick Star. In one episode, specifically the episode where Sandy has to go out and find the Alaskan bullworm, in that episode, Patrick came up with the most ingenious idea ever dreamt up by any engineer. Are you ready? He said that they should take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else. What I want you to do is I want you to use that same logic on your decimal. I want you to think about taking your decimal and pushing it somewhere else. In this case, if we have 75 hundredths and we push our decimal to the right twice, that's going to move our decimal here on the other side of our 5. That's going to give us, in percentage form, 75%. You got that? Well, what happens if it's not totally clear what belongs where? In this example, we have 8/10. If we take that number and move our decimal to the right twice, we're going to have a bizarre empty space right here next to that 8. Brainstorm a little bit before you go any farther. What numbers could go there that would keep this problem more or less the same? Have you thought about it? Did you think about 1? Did you think about 2? Or did you just go straight to 0? Hopefully you went straight to 0 because that's what you have to put there. When you move your decimal around and you find that you have an empty space that needs to be filled, a 0 is what typically will belong in that empty space. So that's going to give us our answer of 80%. Did you get that? Okay. The next part we're going to talk about is going from percentage to fractions. This one's a little bit tricky. You have to place your percent over 100 and simplify. Okay, I lied. It's not that tricky. In this example, we've got 20%. You take that 20% and stick it over 100. That's going to give you 20 hundredths. Well, 20 and 100 are both divisible by 20. 20 can be divided by 20 to give us 1, and 100 can be divided by 20 to give us 5. And that's as simplified as our fraction can get. Not too much to go over here. Let's go ahead and talk about something a little different. Going from a fraction to a percent. So I understand that this looks incredibly wordy. I understand this may be a lot to take in at first. But in all actuality, you're just taking two things that we've already covered and combining them. In fact, we've done much of this already. In our earlier example, we took 3/5, divided it, and got our answer of 6/10. All you have to do from that point is treat your decimal the same way that you would treat it if you were changing from a decimal to a percent. In this case, you multiply it by 100, or move your decimal twice, and you're going to get 60%. This may look incredibly wordy, and you are certainly welcome to pause the video at any point that I'm talking on this slide. But in all actuality, simply take a fraction, solve it as you would as a decimal, and then use that decimal to get your percentage. The last piece I want to talk to you about is taking your percentage and turning it into a decimal. If you remember earlier, when we took our decimal and turned it into a percent, we had to multiply it by 100, or move our decimal to the right by 2 spaces. If you are doing the opposite, taking your percent and turning it into a decimal, then you're going to have to do the opposite. You will have to take your percentage and either divide it by 100 or simply move the decimal to the left by 2 spaces. In this case, I've prepared 75% and 90%. What you have to do is take that 85% and envision that there is a decimal, an invisible decimal, hiding at the end of it, right there. Next, you're going to take that decimal and push it somewhere else, specifically that way, 2 spaces. Once, twice. That's going to land it right here in front of that 8, which, in decimal form, gives me 0 and 85 hundredths. If we use our example of 90%, again, envision that decimal at the end of the number, and then you can move that decimal over by 2 spaces to give you 0.9. Did you catch what I did? I didn't write the 0 after that 9. Any 0 that is to the far right side of a decimal, if there is no number coming after that 0 is useless. It does not need to be written. 0.9 is the same thing as 0.90. This is going to be 9/10 regardless of how many zeros I put next to it. The only case where it might matter if you are putting a 0 directly to the right of this number is if you are dealing with money, in which case you are going to need to have 2 decimal places regardless of if there is anything in your hundredths place. Okay? Are you all set? Alright. Alright everyone, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video informative. If you'd like, please leave a comment down below, or just like it or subscribe. I'll be okay with any one of those 3 options. And in the meanwhile, this is Mr. A. Have a nice night.